On this Wednesday night, Russia tightens its grip on Ukraine. Russian forces gaining some ground as Ukrainians keep fighting back, the multiplying casualties and the humanitarian crisis.
We are living in real hell.
The Alberta farmer who flew to Poland to help.
These are my people.
Providing shelter and safe haven. Ukraine's hospitals under siege.
They're under the strain of constant bombing.
Fears the crisis will collapse the healthcare system and taking a hike.
It could actually have a positive long-term effect.
The rise of Canada's benchmark interest rate.
Global National with Donna Friesen.
Air raid sirens and reports of loud explosions in the Ukraine capital tonight. A week into Russia's war on Ukraine, the bombardments are intensifying. In Kharkiv, Ukraine's second largest city, buildings were hit in the city's center. Ukraine's state emergency services says 2,000 civilians have been killed. That number impossible to verify. Ukrainians continue to try to hold back Russian forces. These people blocked an access point to Ukraine's largest nuclear power plant, but Russian forces are making inroads. Good evening and thanks for joining us. The Pentagon says it believes Vladimir Putin intends to topple the Ukrainian government and that the Russians still have a significant amount of combat power that they have not used. Our coverage begins with Jeff Semple.
Ukraine's largest, most densely populated cities are now under fire. Russian rockets rained down on the southern cities of Mariupol and nearby Kherson. The strategically important city of 300,000 is now under Russian control. Russian soldiers patrolling the streets, making it the first major city to fall since the war began last week, and forming the makings of a Russian-controlled land bridge between Crimea and the Donbass region. In the northeast, this is what's left of Ukraine's second largest city of Kharkiv, home to 1.5 million people. Police headquarters, university, and residential buildings obliterated. Bodies in the streets. Incredibly, this woman was pulled from the rubble alive. But Ukraine says more than 2,000 civilians have now been killed. And there are fears that death toll is about to increase dramatically.
Kiev is effectively cut off and surrounded.
Russia's military has now encircled the Ukrainian capital. Many of its remaining residents now scrambling to leave.
People are saying today is the last day to leave Kiev.
Including this woman who arrived to find the last trains already full. These pregnant women and newborns are now hiding in the cellar of this Kyiv maternity hospital.
We are living in real hell. I could never imagine that something like that can happen in 21st century in a capital of the European country.
Russia has so far failed to claim the capital. This nearby Russian military convoy has been stuck here for days. For the first time, the Russian Defense Ministry confirmed a number of casualties, nearly 500 Russian troops killed. Ukraine claims the true number is closer to 5,000.
The Russian war machine has misfired. What we're seeing now from Tuesday onwards is a regrouping, a change in tactics, much more brutal tactics.
With this proverbial gun to their head, Ukrainian officials will meet their Russian counterparts for more talks on Thursday. Most expect Russia won't accept anything less than a complete capitulation. But these pictures of Ukrainians defiant, fearlessly blocking the streets in front of their communities don't look like people who are about to surrender.
Should they make kind of concerted move on Kyiv, the capital, they're going to be meeting quite a resistance. Even if you get control of these key centers, the resistance is going to be enormous. And I'm not so sure they have a strategy to deal with that.
Jeff Semple, Global News.
Hundreds of thousands of Ukrainians have fled and more are expected, though getting out is getting much harder. The UN Refugee Agency estimates more than 874,000 Ukrainians have now crossed into neighboring countries since Russia attacked. Well over half of them are in Poland. The Polish government says a further 50,000 Ukrainians are arriving every day. Our Mike Armstrong is in Poland, about 100 kilometers from the Ukrainian border. Canada's Foreign Affairs Minister is there too, along with other Canadians who feel compelled to try to help the flood of people who have left everything behind.
It's a tiny one-bedroom apartment that's not actually home to anyone living in it, but it's safe. They are 4 adults and 5 children from Ukraine who've escaped the war to Poland. They're basically the guests of the woman who rented the apartment, Heidi Bachman, a farmer from Bentley, Alberta. She's Canadian with Ukrainian heritage and says that pulled her here.
These are my people. You know, if my family would have stayed put in Odessa, 100 years ago, this would be me. This is me. These are my people.
Now, just days ago, these children were hiding in bunkers. They're young, but they still understood the explosions around them meant danger.
Flying, she
covers her ears.
Covers ears and afraid.
Shivers.
The news coming out of their hometown isn't good. The Russian military says it is now in control of the city of Kherson, and the videos coming out of it seem to back that up. They're Russian soldiers on familiar streets. Ukrainians in this apartment left behind their parents, brothers and sisters, almost everyone they knew. This woman's husband said goodbye at the border and turned back to help others escape.
Too many people call, help,
He's getting a lot of calls
please, help. But sometimes he cannot.
Okay, all done.
Now, Bachman met these families almost by chance. They were referred to her by a stranger. She financed the first part of her trip by selling a load of grain. The rest is coming from friends who heard about what she's doing.
Every time I look at my bank account, it has more money in it.
Yes.
Coming here, Bachman thought she'd be helping orphans, possibly move to Canada. It turned out the kids came with parents. The goal now is to help until they can go home. With her son rubbing her back, this woman says she doesn't know when that will be, or if her loved ones will still be alive. We have a truly cruel war, she says. Now, also in this city on this day, Canada's Foreign Affairs Minister. Melanie Joly met with staff from Canada's embassy in Ukraine. They should be in Kyiv. When safety became an issue, they were relocated to Western Ukraine and then eventually moved outside the country to here. The minister says the staff is working to help about 1,200 Canadians still stuck in Ukraine escape.
Providing even in terms of travel itineraries, making sure that people understand what's the best way to get to Poland. Logistics.
Now, as for that 1,200 number, the minister says it's likely even higher. Not all Canadians register when they travel, and that makes helping them harder. Donna?
Mike Armstrong in Poland, thank you. The chief prosecutor of the International Criminal Court says he is immediately proceeding with active investigations into possible war crimes committed in Ukraine and says work on collecting evidence has begun. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky said late today he spoke with Prime Minister Justin Trudeau by phone, thanking him for imposing sanctions and stressing the need to expand restrictive measures. A Kremlin spokesperson admitted today the Russian economy has suffered a serious blow from economic sanctions. The Moscow Stock Exchange stayed closed for a third day today. On the London Stock Exchange, Russian companies have lost 98% of their value in 2 weeks, wiping out $572 billion in value. Russian energy giants and big banks have been reduced to penny stocks. And the list of companies that have stopped doing business and selling products to Russia keeps growing. Today, Canada Goose, an apparel manufacturer, joined dozens of global brands suspending sales to Russia. Netflix, Google, Apple, Boeing, and Mercedes-Benz are among the companies which have cut ties. Video game maker Electronic Arts says it is removing Russian teams from this year's NHL and FIFA games. One of Russia's richest men, an oligarch who made his riches by seizing control of the country's assets when the Soviet Union collapsed, has escaped sanctions, but Roman Abramovich now says he's willing to sell the Chelsea Football Club. In a statement, the billionaire who owns mansions, yachts, and jets says he believes the sale is in the best interest of the club. Abramovich says he'll use all the net proceeds to benefit victims of the war in Ukraine. Exactly how isn't clear. Abramovich has not explicitly condemned the invasion nor criticized Putin. He bought the Premier League club in 2003, pumping millions into buying top players. Anti-war protests continue in Russia. This is in St. Petersburg. People rallied around this elderly woman as Russian police moved in to take her away. She was one of more than 200 people reported to have been arrested during this rally. Groups monitoring the protests estimate some 8,000 anti-war demonstrators have been detained across Russia since the invasion began. The Canadian government says 460 additional Canadian troops are being deployed to Latvia, but they haven't arrived yet. Those who are already on the ground are preparing for what might come. 540 soldiers are training to defend against a possible attack should Russia extend its aggression beyond Ukraine. Mercedes Stephenson reports from Latvia.
Lieutenant Colonel Dan Rochelle is the NATO battle group commander on the ground in Latvia. It's his job to help deter a Russian invasion here and be prepared if Vladimir Putin attacks.
But our mission here is focused on deterrence and a defensive capability. We do a lot of training in order to be ready, and this battle group already has a very high state of readiness to be able to go from a training posture to an operational posture very quickly.
A necessity given these troops would be the first Canadians to fight.
We train primarily for a defensive scenario where there could be an escalation of tension, where we may have to ramp up deterrence activities, all the way up to actually defending the territorial integrity of Latvia.
There is a renewed meaning and urgency to this exercise. Canadians are practicing tactics aimed at a superpower with superior firepower. One part of an institution-wide shift after years of focusing on counterinsurgency and roadside bombs. Here, the focus is on fighter jets, artillery, tanks, and missiles. A change in tactics to cyber defenses and concealing equipment. Smaller mobile headquarters, just two vehicles backed together with a tarp. While training for the worst, Canada's task force commander doesn't want to exaggerate the threat.
I'm not worried that we're going to have to deal with an invasion in the short term, though.
Despite Russia's aggression in Ukraine, the colonel says NATO troops are effective, and so is deterrence. Vladimir Putin knows the consequences of attacking a NATO country.
I wouldn't say that deterrence is not working against Russia. The Ukrainian crisis is one thing. He has not attacked a NATO country.
For troops on the ground here, they want Canadians to know one thing. They're ready, and they're doing their best.
I just want to reassure Canadians that their soldiers are always constantly working hard, and we're vigilant, and we're doing our best to represent Canada on the world stage.
Now it just becomes that much more important that we maintain that focus and that we get ready for whatever we might have to face.
Mercedes Stephenson, Global News, Riga.
The sanctions against Russia keep piling up. Coming up, the new measures punishing Putin and the richest Russians. At the United Nations General Assembly, Russia has been denounced by much of the world. The vast majority of member countries voted to condemn Russia today and called for the immediate withdrawal of its troops from Ukraine. Canada says more sanctions against Russia are coming in the days ahead. Jackson Proskow on the pressure the world is exerting.
In a remarkable sign of unity, 3/4 of UN members voted to condemn Russia's war with Ukraine. Even Moscow's allies, China and Iran, chose to abstain rather than support Putin.
They have come to deprive Ukraine of the very right to exist.
It came after an emotional plea from Ukraine's ambassador and firm warnings from the U.S. that civilians could soon face exceptionally lethal Russian weapons.
Now it appears Russia is preparing to increase the brutality of its campaign against Ukraine.
Russia dismissed it all as a Western pressure campaign, one that is squeezing Moscow at every level. Airplane makers Boeing and Airbus are the latest Western corporations to cut off supplies to Russian companies, while the U.S. announced deeper sanctions.
Nothing is off the table.
The White House has fully blocked Russia's defense sector and taken aim at Putin's allies in Belarus. During his State of the Union address Tuesday, President Biden announced plans to target Russia's elite oligarchs directly.
We're joining with European allies to find and seize their yachts, their luxury apartments, their private jets.
Russia is now so deeply isolated, the U.S. Secretary of State assured everyday Russians that they are not the target.
The economic costs that we've been forced to impose on Russia are not aimed at you. They're aimed at compelling your government to stop its actions, to stop its aggression.
So far, none of it has convinced Putin to blink. Yet NATO allies remain steadfast that there's only so far they're willing to go. The U.S. insists it has no plans to get directly involved in the conflict, and it's rejecting that repeated request from Ukraine to establish a no-fly zone, one that would stop Russian airstrikes. Jackson Proskow, Global News, Washington.
Canada's interest rate rise ahead, why it's going up and what it means. The Bank of Canada has raised its key interest rate for the first time since 2018, and several banks quickly followed suit. This is also the first increase since the start of the pandemic, when the key rate was cut dramatically. It's intended to help slow the surging cost of living, though the bank admits outside factors, including Russia's invasion of Ukraine, mean inflation will continue to rise. Anne Gaviola explains how all this could impact you.
With inflation raging at levels not seen in 3 decades, the bank has taken a first step towards taming it, though many factors stoking inflation are beyond the bank's control. Here's what a 25 basis point hike means for a $700,000 home. That's the average home price in Canada. With a typical 5-year variable rate mortgage, that's an extra $73 a month, nearly $900 a year. RE/MAX expects this hike and ones in the near future to have a temporary calming effect on the housing market.
It's going to take some froth out of the market and actually have a positive long-term effect, because what we're seeing, or what we have seen over the last several months, is not sustainable.
But the modest rate hike isn't the only thing affecting household budgets. The unprovoked invasion of Ukraine by Russia is a major new source of uncertainty, according to Canada's central bank. Already, the conflict has spiked prices at the pumps. Right now, Metro Vancouver has the highest gas prices in North America, and there's more sticker shock in store at pumps across the country. If the conflict continues beyond this month, it could take a bite out of growth, just as the economy returns to pre-pandemic levels. The question is, how long will it last?
When you look through many of the last 30, 40 years, you tend to get shorter durations, which would suggest it won't impede their rate path. However, this is really a historic moment, and we can't predict the duration.
In a recent survey, more than half of households were concerned about the impact of rising rates on their finances, and 35% said any rate hikes could push them towards bankruptcy.
The stakes are high for the Bank of Canada as it weighs the size and the timing of the next rate hike, which could come as early as 6 weeks from now. Anne Gaviola, Global News, Toronto.
WestJet Airlines says it is buying Sunwing Airlines, an effort to expand its footprint in the holiday travel market. WestJet CEO says the deal will consolidate the airlines, but Sunwing Vacations and WestJet Vacations will continue to operate as separate brands. Financial terms of the agreement were not disclosed. The agreement is subject to regulatory approval, and that's expected to close late this year. The United Nations has approved a plan to create the world's first global plastic pollution treaty. The resolution lays out a framework to rein in soaring plastic pollution. The goal is to establish rules and standards about the production, use, and disposal of plastics around the world. Nearly 200 countries have agreed to it in principle. It's being hailed as the most significant Green Deal since the 2015 Paris Climate Accord. International negotiations will now begin, with a legally binding treaty expected to be finalized by 2024. Ukraine's hospitals strained by war. Next, the Canadian efforts to help save lives. One of the costs of war is the staggering toll it takes on civilians. The crush of victims and the attacks on medical infrastructure is fueling a health crisis in Ukraine. Critical care has become difficult to provide. Experts say the time to help is now. As Jamie Maracher reports, Canadians are answering the call, and a warning some of the images are disturbing.
There's no time to stop, no time to think. Bombarded with casualties, doctors and nurses at this Ukrainian hospital work around the clock to save lives.
This is beyond a scale I think that anyone has seen. This is more on the scale of what you might see in the Second World War.
Toronto-based plastic surgeon Dr. Olli Antinishin has done countless medical missions in Ukraine, reconstructing the faces of injured during the Crimean crisis. Their hospitals, he says, are less equipped and face challenges on a good day. He's assembling a Canadian team to go back. Without the urgent help, Antinishin fears Ukraine's healthcare system will crumble.
They're under the strain of constant bombing and not being able to operate during hours, and power failures and cyber attacks and everything else you could possibly imagine. It makes it difficult to function.
Already, patients and staff have been displaced, moved to makeshift maternity wards and bomb shelters, and pediatric units in basements. There's a shortage of cancer medication, insulin, and oxygen, and it's unclear how the World Health Organization will get aid into war zones. Inside Ukraine, this family physician received medical kits from a small Calgary-based organization, but dispensing them, he says, is proving difficult.
Some of the cities are surrounded by Russians, and they don't give us green corridors to give the supplies to the cities.
Necessities, the 32-year-old worries, will be completely depleted in mere weeks, putting more lives at risk and threatening the fundamental human right to health care. Jamie Morocker, Global News, Toronto.
It's been said that Russia's war in Ukraine is a clash between the rule of law and the rule of the gun, between democracies and autocracies. We leave you tonight with the words of a special advisor to Ukraine's president, Andriy Yermak. He says he is at the side of President Vladimir Zelensky in a bunker in Kyiv. His appeal to the West was published in a special editorial in the New York Times. "We will fight to the last breath to protect our country," he writes. But make no mistake, other autocrats are watching, taking lessons. Mr. Putin's forces will continue to terrorize the country to induce surrender. If they don't succeed, they will burn it all down. It's either bow or vanish. No third option is allowed. We beseech our Western allies and partners to make the costs unbearable for Russia now. Ukraine is not asking for its allies to put boots on the ground. We need anti-tank and anti-aircraft weapons and other ammunition delivered to our brave soldiers right now. We are calling on the West to impose a no-fly zone over Ukraine. Every day brings the possibility that our words may be our final ones. So let them be a plea for support for a free Ukraine.